What if your birth wasn't the beginning, but a return? What if your parents, your siblings, even your closest friends weren't chosen by chance, but were souls you've known before? Thousands of real cases point to this possibility. Among them, Dr. Ian Stevenson's research revealed patterns modern science still struggles to explain. Maybe we don't meet our family for the first time. Maybe we're just finding them again. Why is a person born in a particular family? In some cultures, like among the Burmese, the Igbo, and certain tribes in northwestern North America, it's common for the person who remembers a past life and the person they used to be to belong to the same family, either close or extended. This has led some to believe that when reincarnation happens within the same family or between familiar families, a kind of psychic force might be involved, attracting the soul to be reborn there. But how does this happen? The hypothesis is that all shared experiences leave mental imprints and create psychic bonds between individuals. The longer and more intense a relationship, the stronger these connections become. When a need arises, like in a life or death situation, and the bond is strong enough, telepathic communication may occur between people even at great distances. Sometimes this shows up as a vague impression or intuition. Other times, it's so vivid, it feels like the distant person has appeared before them. In such cases, it's said that the two individuals are tuned to one another, like two strings on a violin vibrating in harmony. But the connection goes further. It seems to involve spatial orientation. Somehow, the deceased or dying person manages to locate the one they're connected to, and typically only that person receives the message. By the same kind of psychic navigation, it's suggested that a discarnate personality can find its way to the parents of its next life. These connections are not limited to blood relatives. They also occur between spouses, in-laws, and even close friends. Family ties aren't inherently sacred. They're simply relationships in which we spend more time and share strong emotions. In fact, some people form deeper connections with friends than with their own relatives. That's why there are cases of telepathy or apparitions between friends, but almost never with complete strangers. There are also reincarnation cases where the previous personality had a deep affection for the parents of the reborn child, despite not being related. In some cases, even before dying, a person chose their future parents. This is found, for example, among the Tlingit and Haida peoples. Expressing that wish can intensify emotional attachment, but some level of emotional bond likely existed already. Unspoken ties can be just as powerful as openly declared ones. Interestingly, enmity also creates bonds. There are cases where a child remembers being someone who had a serious conflict with one of the parents, even involving injuries or death. In a few Burmese cases, the child recalled that the previous personality owed something to the current family. Even if the debt was small, in the Buddhist mindset, where all accounts must be settled, that could create a karmic burden strong enough to lead to reincarnation. Sometimes it's hard to separate affection from self-interest. Take the case of Maung Myint. His mother sold homemade liquor, and as a baby, he showed a strange fixation with her bottles. Observers believed that the previous personality returned to that family because he had loved drinking that very liquor during his past life. When we add all the cases of reincarnation within families to those with clear emotional bonds, it becomes harder to agree with skeptics like the historian Edward Gibbon, who believed that life is guided only by chance, not by purpose. Gibbon, an 18th century rationalist, saw human affairs as ruled by chaos rather than meaning. So far, we've looked at families with known or familiar ties. But what about long-distance cases? In many of these, there's no clear explanation. Neither researchers nor families can say why the child was born with those memories in that particular family. Depending on their beliefs, some informants attribute it to karma or divine will. To them, the child was simply born there, and they don't question the reason. Even so, the researcher identified 3 recurring factors. Hidden connections. Sometimes, families claimed not to know each other, only to later discover a previous contact, such as friendly business relations. Past life bonds. Some children claim to have been with the current family in a life even older than the one they mostly recalled. Though the others didn't remember, the details were consistent. Geographical factors. In many cases, the child was born close to where the previous personality had died. Striking examples include Burmese girls who remembered being Japanese soldiers who died near their birthplace. A boy whose mother had helped prepare the body of a woman she didn't know, and soon after gave birth to a child claiming to be her. Cases where the deceased's body was moved and the child was born precisely where it was finally laid to rest. Children born after their parents visited places tied to the previous person's death. Some cases even cross borders. A soul that died in London, Tokyo, or Virginia may reincarnate in Burma, India, or Lebanon. Distance doesn't seem to be a barrier, although most cases happen within 25 kilometers of the death site. Sometimes there are signs of conscious will. There are reports of people choosing their next parents before dying. This may show up in announcing dreams, where a spirit asks for permission to be reborn, or even expresses frustration when denied. In one case, a spirit even reproached the mother for aborting a previous attempt at return. Let's look at some real-life cases that illustrate these patterns. The liquor that brought a soul back. Case Maung Myint, Burma. Even before he could speak, Maung Myint had a peculiar fascination. He would gaze longingly at his mother's liquor bottles with a mix of nostalgia and desire. It wasn't a childish curiosity. There was something uncanny in his eyes that unsettled the family. When he finally began to talk, he revealed something astounding. He claimed to have been a man who used to visit that very house to drink the homemade liquor his mother now brewed. The connection was so intimate, so specific, that listeners were left with chills or awe. Did he come back for the liquor, or for the warmth of a home where he once felt welcomed? The soul returning to repay a debt. Case: Burmese child with a karmic debt. A young boy, born into a humble family in Burma, began speaking of a past life, but not of lost loves or tragic deaths. He spoke of a debt. He said that in a previous life, he had borrowed money from the parents who now raised him. The debt apparently, was small. But the boy insisted. He had to repay it. That's why he had come back. In Buddhist tradition, every debt must be repaid. Nothing is left unresolved. And so, that small child carried the soul of a man who could not find peace until he returned to make things right. The daughter who came back and refused to take no. Case, Rajani, Sukla, India. Rajani was not her mother's first daughter. The first had died tragically in an accident. Soon after, the grieving mother began to have dreams. In them, her deceased daughter gently pleaded to return. She wanted to be reborn. The mother, still broken, wasn't ready. She rejected the pregnancy that followed. Then came another dream. This time, the girl was upset. She scolded her mother for not letting her come back. Eventually, the woman accepted the next pregnancy. Rajani was born, and at just a few years old, she began to reveal impossible knowledge, family secrets, intimate memories. It was as if the child who died simply refused to leave. The woman who died on a train and returned in a stranger's village. Case, Maung, Burma. A woman suffered a fatal heart attack aboard a train and died unexpectedly in the village of Thaloon. She was a complete stranger there. One of the local women helped prepare her body for burial. A compassionate gesture, seemingly without consequence. But months later, that same woman gave birth to a boy, Maung. From a young age, he spoke of the dead woman, of her train ride, of her final thoughts, and most haunting of all, he claimed to have seen his future mother while she prepared his body for burial, as if death had only been a pause. Soul that floated downriver. Case, Maung, Kyaw, Burma. A man was murdered, his body thrown into a river. Days later, his corpse was found trapped beneath a dock in front of a house. A woman discovered it and called for help. The body floated on. Later, that same woman became pregnant, and the child born, Maung Kyaw, spoke of it all. The fall into the water, the river's pull, the feeling of floating, as if the soul had followed its own body until it found the one who would help it return. Soldiers who came back as girls. Case, Burmese twins, former Japanese soldiers. Twin girls were born in a rural Burmese village. From a very young age, they claimed they had been brothers, Japanese soldiers, killed during World War II. They described falling during a British offensive in 1945. They recalled tactics, uniforms, and the sound of gunfire. Most astonishing of all, they said they had wanted to be reborn in Japan, but couldn't. So they came back to the very place where they had died. They were born just meters away from the battlefield where their bodies had fallen. Was it a longing for home, or a need to finish an unfinished story? The woman who couldn't rejoin her family, but got as close as possible. Case, Lalitha, Abeyawardena, Sri Lanka. Since childhood, Lalitha spoke of another life. She said she had lived north of Colombo, though she had never been there. Her current family had no ties to that place. She said she had died in a hospital far from home and wanted to return to her brothers. But none of her former family had any fertile women. Curiously, 2 of her former brothers had moved to the village where Lalitha was born. One of them had been her favorite, She was born just 200 meters from her old house, not in her past family, but as close as she could get, as if her soul had said, "If I can't return to you, let me be near." The soul that found its mother while she bathed. Case Sundar Lal. India claimed he had once been a man named Hanne Lal, who died of plague. After his death, his body was discarded into a river. But what floated wasn't just his body. His soul, now free and formless, drifted without direction. In that state, he saw a woman bathing in the river. Something in her presence drew him in. He felt an instant pull and chose to follow her. That woman would later become his mother. 9 months after that encounter, Sundar Lal was born. He spoke of the river, the disease, the deep loneliness, and with quiet conviction, he said he had found the one who brought him back, the soldier without a grave, who was buried and reborn. Case Yusuf Köse. Turkey amid chaos in Turkey. A man was brutally murdered, his head severed. Fearing trouble with the authorities, neighbors moved the body from village to village until one man, just one, bravely buried him. He joined the head with the body and gave him a proper grave. Soon after, that man's wife became pregnant. Their child, Yusuf, described everything: how he was killed, how he was moved, and how he was finally laid to rest. He didn't seek revenge, only the peace of being remembered with dignity. The Indian Girl with English Memories. Case Vinita, India, United Kingdom. Vinita grew up in New Delhi, yet she spoke with a British accent no one had taught her. She preferred Western habits, avoided traditional food, and often said, "That's not how we do it in London." She was fascinated by images of England, knew train station names, and once shared, "I used to be a little girl in London, but something bad happened." She had never visited the city, yet she could sketch a house and describe a nearby park with uncanny accuracy. Though her former family was never found, many of her details matched. It was as if a part of her still remembered a life cut short, far from home. The woman who died in the US and returned to Lebanon. Case Suzanne, Ghanem, Lebanon, US. Suzanne, born in Lebanon, spoke from early childhood of a woman named Sada. She said Sada had died in Richmond, Virginia, during heart surgery. Suzanne could draw the house. She talked about the dog, the hospital bed, the American food. She had a surprising affinity for US culture. One day, she said, "My mother over there is still waiting for me." Investigators found Sada. She had died just as Suzanne said, and she too had been Lebanese. It was as if the soul had crossed oceans, only to return to its homeland in a new body. The soldier who fell in Korea and returned home. Case Adnan, Kelleçi, Turkey, Korea. Adnan grew up in Turkey, but with an obsession for war. At 3 years old, he spoke of military strategy, trenches, fallen comrades. One day, he saw a photo of the Korean War. Tears filled his eyes. "I was there," he said. "I died for my country." He described the Turkish uniform, the exact position of his unit, and even the icy weather at his death. His family had no military background, but Adnan spoke as if he still wore the helmet. And so, a soldier fallen far from home, returned to the country he loved. So, what factors truly influence where and to whom a person is born? Are emotional bonds the key? Unresolved psychological ties? Or might there be variables we've yet to identify? Perhaps birth is not the starting point, but rather one step in a larger continuum. And perhaps the individuals we meet in this life are connected to us in ways we are only beginning to understand.